Apple MacBook Air M1 2020. With the MacBook Air M1 2020, Apple has given its thinnest and slimmest a giant leap forward in performance. The 2020 Air comes with the Apple M1 processor, the manufacturer's highly acclaimed impressively powerful ARM-based chip, under its hood, giving it just the right boost it's long deserved. Alongside the macOS 11 Big Sur, it comes preloaded during its release. Any MacBook Air M1 you purchase now should either come with the new macOS Monterey, or have a free upgrade to it. It has become among the most powerful thin and light laptops. It boasts improvements in performance, as well as better power efficiency and longer battery life, while sticking with the same pricing as its predecessor, $999 £999 AU $1,599, the MacBook Air 2020. The MacBook Air M1 2020, therefore, offers upgraded internals without any additional cost. So, if you weren't swayed by the Intel-based model, then maybe this one will change your mind. Considering the price points of premium Windows 10 competitors like the HP Spectre X360 and Dell XPS 13, late 2020, both of which are pricier, the Air's price tag looks even more competitive. You can also go for a more powerful MacBook Air with extra storage for $1,249 £1,249 AU $1,949, and both of these can be further customized with more memory and even more storage. Price-wise, then, we think Apple has nailed it. Of course, this certainly isn't a cheap laptop, but nor does it feel overpriced, especially compared to its similarly spec'd rivals, something that Apple has been accused of in the past. Apple has also been accused of caring more about aesthetics of its products than the actual features and functions, but with the MacBook Air M1 2020, we actually think the opposite is true. This is because while the MacBook Air has some huge changes on the inside, most noticeably the M1 chip on the outside, nothing has really changed. So, this model looks and feels just like the last model and the model before that. For people who love the look of the MacBook Air, this may be good news, but we feel it's a bit of a missed opportunity. The M1-based MacBook Air is such a revolutionary and exciting device. We'd have loved to have seen Apple take a few risks with the design as well, even if it was just by making it lighter or slimming the bezels down that surround the screen. The fact is, HP and Dell have now overtaken Apple when it comes to designing thin, light and gorgeous laptops, a fact that would have seemed unthinkable a few years ago. When it comes to performance, however, we have no qualms. The M1 has proved to be a complete beast that puts Intel to shame in many respects. During our time with the MacBook Air M1 2020, we were incredibly impressed with how it performed. Big Sur runs well, and the visual overhaul of the operating system offers a nice change, while still feeling familiar. The fact that both new and legacy apps run well on the M1 chip is very commendable, and so far there don't seem to be any issues with running apps built for Intel Macs using Rosetta 2, the tool used by Apple to allow older Mac apps to run on the M1. Also, the fact that you can now run thousands of iOS apps and games pretty much flawlessly is a huge win as well. Battery life also seems to be fantastic, and the fanless design is nice, as it means the laptop runs silently. We do have our concerns about how it manages heat, however. In the end, we'd have liked Apple to have been a bit more ambitious with the design of the MacBook Air M1 2020, a bold reinvention of the laptop to match the internal hardware and software overhauls would have made this an even more exciting device. Prices for the MacBook Air M1 2020 start at $999 £999 AU $1,599. As usual, there are a number of specifications available at launch, and you can further customize these to get the MacBook Air 2020 that best suits your needs and budget. The base model features an M1 chip with an 8-core CPU and 7-core GPU, 8 GB of RAM, and 256 GB SSD. There's also a higher specs model, priced at $1,249 £1,249 AU $1,949, which is an M1 chip with an 8-core CPU, an 8-core GPU, 8 GB of RAM and 512 GB of storage. So, for that extra money you're getting an additional core in the GPU, and double the storage. You can also configure these models to have 16 GB of RAM, for $200 £200 AU $300 extra, and up to 2 TB of SSD storage, for $800 £800 AU $1,200. For comparison, the MacBook Air 2020, launched earlier in 2020, also started at $999 £999 AU $1,599, which was actually cheaper than the launch price of the MacBook Air 2019. So you're getting the MacBook Air M1 2020 for the same price as the earlier model, which we commend Apple for. If you bought a MacBook Air a few months ago, however, you may feel a little annoyed that it's already outdated. That $999 £999 AU $1,599 entry point isn't just the cheapest way of getting an Apple laptop, it's an incredibly competitive price point that undercuts many of the best 13-inch laptops running Windows 10, such as the Dell XPS 13. If you thought Apple's laptops were overpriced compared to the competition, think again. We've mentioned how, thanks to its competitive price, the MacBook Air M1 2020 is helping challenge people's preconceptions about MacBooks. But the MacBook Air, along with the MacBook Pro 13-inch M1 2020 and Mac Mini M1 2020, also offer strong rebuttals to the criticism, often leveled at the Apple, that its products are more style than substance. People often dismiss Apple as making products that look good, but that don't do anything particularly revolutionary when it comes to the actual hardware. With the MacBook Air M1 2020, however, it's the complete opposite. With this laptop, Apple has actually done some really exciting things on the inside, switching to its own M1 chip and building macOS Big Sur from the ground up to take advantage of it, while leaving the actual design of the device completely unchanged. This is both good news and bad news. First, the good news. For many people, the iconic design of the MacBook Air is pretty much perfect, so they don't see the need for any radical change. At the same time, by simply offering minor spec bumps every year, the MacBook Air was in danger of being outclassed by more ambitious rivals. So, by concentrating on revolutionizing the hardware of the MacBook Air, and not tinkering with the design, Apple is doing something many of its critics have argued it should do: focus on the unglamorous, yet essential, stuff. But what about the bad news? Well, because the MacBook Air M1 2020 promises to be such a big revolution, the fact that it looks and feels exactly the same as previous MacBook Airs is a little disappointing, to put it mildly. The MacBook Air M1 2020 seconds dimensions of 0.16-0.63 x 11.97 x 8.36 inches, 0.411.61 x 30.41 x 21.24 centimeters, and weight of 2.8 pounds, 1.29 kilograms, are exactly the same as those of both the MacBook Air 2020 and the 2019 model, and virtually the same as those of the 2018 Air, which is a bit lighter. On the outside, then, this MacBook Air looks identical to the three previous models, and it means that the excitement that comes with pulling the MacBook Air from its packaging is somewhat dulled, particularly if you've owned one of those earlier machines. There had been rumors that the move to Apple's own silicon would result in lighter devices, but this isn't the case. One big design change that has been enabled by the M1 chip, though, is that the MacBook Air M1 2020 is now fanless. This means the internals keep cool enough under workloads without the need for fans to kick in and cool them down. There's a catch to this, which we'll get to in a bit, but it means the MacBook Air M1 2020 runs virtually silently, and it's very impressive. The lack of fans could have allowed Apple to make the MacBook Air thinner and lighter, so it's interesting that it remains the same size and weight as its predecessors. On opening up the MacBook Air M1 2020, you're again presented with a sight that's familiar, and in a good way. The best addition to the previous MacBook Air's design, the Magic Keyboard, is again included here. It really is a lovely keyboard to work on, feeling tactile and responsive, despite how flat the keys are. The Touch ID button is again situated above the keyboard, and it remains the best fingerprint scanner we've used on a laptop. Too many of the fingerprint scanners on Windows laptops struggle to log us in reliably, but the Touch ID button here logged us in successfully pretty much every time, even when we'd not completely covered the scanner with a finger. The screen is also virtually the same as the one on the MacBook Air 2020, except for one big difference. So, it's still 13.3 inches with a 400 nit LED backlit display, and a Retina display of 2560x1600 resolution, and comes with Apple's True Tone technology, which automatically adjusts the color temperature on the screen based on the ambient light. What's new here is that the MacBook Air M1 2020 second screen now supports the P3 wide color gamut, which results in more accurate true-to-life images. P3 support used to be only found in the more expensive MacBook Pros, so it's great to see Apple bring this feature to its more affordable MacBook Air lineup. If you're a photographer or video editor who requires accurate colors, you no longer have to automatically go for a MacBook Pro. The screen is also surrounded by those big thick bezels that have been a staple of the MacBook Air's design for ages now, and which leave this laptop feeling a little dated. Devices such as the Dell XPS 13 and the Huawei MateBook X 2020 offer incredibly thin bezels around the display, and not only does it make these devices look more modern, it means the makers can actually reduce the overall size of the laptop further while offering the same size screen. Yep, you read that right. We think Huawei has the edge over Apple when it comes to thin and light laptop design. Strange times indeed. The webcam above the screen is also unchanged from last time, with the same 720p FaceTime webcam. The 720p resolution feels distinctly outdated when most competitors offer 1080p, and with more people spending more time working from home these days. We'd have liked Apple to have given the webcam a boost. However, the company claims that thanks to the M1 chip, the image signal processor has been overhauled, giving the webcam supposedly better noise reduction and dynamic range, along with auto white balance. We've only used the webcam for a limited time so far, and it seemed fine, if not mind-blowing. Port-wise, you get the same two Thunderbolt 3 ports and an audio jack as on recent MacBook Airs. The Thunderbolt 3 ports support charging, and can be used to power external monitors, and transfer data up to 40 GB per second. We're glad to see that Apple's move to its own M1 chip, rather than Intel, hasn't meant the loss of the Thunderbolt ports. Thunderbolt is an interface developed by Intel. As soon as we began using the MacBook Air M1 2020, we were impressed. It boots up quickly, an additional benefit of the M1 chip. Big Sur feels fast and responsive, and the look for the operating system really impresses. The interface has a more modern look, with bright, vibrant colors that really show off the MacBook Air's screen. It's also less cluttered, so you're not overwhelmed by icons and options, while the control center has been redesigned based on the version in iOS. It looks neater, and it's easier to use. All applications that you usually run in macOS on Intel-based MacBooks should work fine with the MacBook Air M1 2020, thanks to some software wizardry using Apple's Rosetta 2 tool, which allows apps to run on the new architecture. We tried a mix of both new apps built for the M1 chip, as well as legacy apps built for Intel Macs, and running via Rosetta, and there was no noticeable difference in terms of performance. The fact that you can seamlessly run older apps on the MacBook Air really is commendable. The M1 chip is based on ARM architecture, and one of the biggest drawbacks of Windows 10 on devices running on ARM-based chips is that you're limited to running only ARM-compatible apps from the Windows Store. There's a rather sparse selection of these, and this severely limits the usability of these devices. Microsoft needs to come up with its own Rosetta pronto. Not only can you run pretty much any existing Mac app on the MacBook Air M1 2020, but thanks to the M1 chip using similar architecture to iPhones, you can now run any iOS app or game as well. This brings a huge amount of new tools to the MacBook, and is genuinely exciting. iOS apps and games are more feature-rich and graphically impressive than ever before, and having access to these could be a game-changer. We played a few iOS games, and they ran perfectly on the MacBook Air. Suddenly, the MacBook has become a decent gaming machine. We were able to have quite a few apps running all at once, swapping between them with ease, and the Apple MacBook Air M1 2020 kept up brilliantly. Throughout our tests, it felt fast and capable. Moving a large 14 GB file from an external SSD took less than a minute, for example. This really does feel like a fast and sprightly machine. Apple claims the MacBook Air is 3 times faster than other laptops in its class, and faster than 98% of PC laptops sold in the past year. It also says the neural engine is 9 times faster than the one in the previous MacBook Air, and its SSD is up to twice as fast, thanks to the M1 and the latest flash technology. One thing to note is that the fanless design of the MacBook Air M1 2020 could mean that performance is throttled when it's performing demanding tasks over long periods of time. Because there are no fans to stop it overheating, the only thing it can do is reduce the performance of the components known as throttling, to control temperatures. In fact, that's why pros may want to go for the MacBook Pro 13-inch. It has the same M1 chip as the MacBook Air, but it has fans, which means it can be used for intensive tasks over longer periods of time, without, Apple claims, throttling. However, in our tests we didn't notice any major incidents of throttling, and as you can see from the benchmark tests, the MacBook Air M1 2020 came impressively close to the performance of the more expensive 13-inch MacBook Pro M1 2020. In both Geekbench 5 and Cinebench, the single-core performance of the MacBook Air was pretty much on par with the MacBook Pro, and multi-core scores weren't that much different either. This is great news for the MacBook Air, and slightly less good news for the 13-inch MacBook Pro M1 2020. Because the MacBook Air M1 2020 is such a good laptop, it almost makes the MacBook Pro feel unnecessary. Performance seemed pretty similar in our day-to-day use, and we even played around with 8K video editing in Final Cut Pro, and while Apple seems keen to stress that the Air is capable of 4K video editing, it actually did a great job at 8K as well, allowing us to scrub through multiple 8K sources with ease. Very impressive. So, with that boost in performance, along with the P3 color gamut support, the MacBook Air M1 2020 is a brilliant choice for video editors who want a more affordable laptop than the MacBook Pro. It makes the MacBook Pro 13 inches slightly harder to justify purchase, though it does have a few key features that the Air misses, such as the touch bar and better cooling. Having both MacBooks churning through high-intensity tasks for long periods of time should show a bigger performance gap in the Pro's favor. But for most people, the MacBook Air M1 2020 will offer plenty of power and performance.